Hey everybody, I'm National Master Jesse Cohen, and this is Grandmaster Intuition Training. You need a pen and a paper and the next 8 minutes. Let's go. The way this works is simple. I'm going to show you 8 problems. You're going to have only 1 minute to solve them. Today, you're going to focus on your intuition. Focus more on what your gut, your instincts are telling you to do, and less on the exact variations and critical calculations, okay? This is instinctual training. What we're trying to get you to do here is more quickly look at the correct move the first or second time instead of the fourth or fifth time and save you a bunch of time. This is going to make you a much more effective calculator and therefore a much stronger player. Let's get started. White to move. And time. In this position, you're up a pawn, and you have a simple choice to make. Do you trade off the bishop for the knight and go to the king and pawn endgame up a pawn? Or do you retreat the bishop perhaps to f3 and target the h5 pawn? In this position, you get full point if you went ahead and played bishop takes c6. This does in fact win, but you do have to see a bit farther. You definitely get the full point if you saw that king b4 wins, and you definitely get the full point if you saw that b4 wins. Although the exact line that Sutovsky took in 2007 was king d6, king d2, king c6, king e3, king d5, king d3, king c6, king e4, king d6, pawn d5, king d7, king d4, king d6, and thankfully pawn a3, passing the move back to black and forcing our king into the c5 square, where we can then continue to advance our pawn or start to pick off black's remaining pawns. It's also very important to notice the following line that does not work. Bishop takes knight, king takes back, pawn b4, king d6, king d3, king d5, pawn a3, king c6, king e4, king d6, pawn d5, and literally king to any of these squares. Let's just pick king e7, because now when white goes into king d4, anytime, black responds with king d6, and white does not have a passing move. White will be forced away from contention of the c5 square, and black can always hold this position and make a draw. Black to move. Begin. And time. In this position, you should sense a couple of things. Firstly, you should sense that white has a weak back rank because the king is trapped on the back row and black has access to the back row with both queen and rook. You should also sense that this rook is desperately defending the bishop only just enough times, and it's also the only thing covering the back rank just enough. You should also sense the fact that black's pieces are kind of aiming a bit at the king side. In this position, black has the earth-shattering move queen to c6, threatening queen takes rook, mostly threatening rook takes e1 check, followed by queen takes g2 checkmate. Obviously, there is no rook takes queen in light of rook takes e1 mate. And just like I was saying before, if we try to save the rook by playing rook to d1, then rook takes e1 check, uncovers queen takes g2 checkmate. So that doesn't work. And so it's just game over. White to move. Begin. And time is up. This bishop is only guarded just enough by this knight, which is only guarded enough just by this bishop. It's kind of this delicate balance. And when you see something fragile in your opponent's position, you should try to smash it. And in this position, white has the simple but effective move, knight to e7. Full points for knight to e7. Next problem. Black to move. Begin. And time. In this position, you actually get -1 point if you thought that taking this knight was okay. Your instinct should have seen that something was going on here, and bishop takes f7 check, king e7, and queen e6 mate shows that's pretty not okay really quickly, yeah? And so going back here, instead, the correct move is knight d5. Full points for knight d5. Notice that there's not much of a defense after queen e7 because of knight g5. There's just not much of a good defense here. However, after knight d5, black has two good ways to continue. Either after knight takes e4, knight on 7 to b6, or after knight takes d5, e takes f3. And that is it. Black to move. Begin. And time. Did you notice that white is threatening checkmate here? Good. Did you totally panic and get distracted by that and just try to defend it? Not so good. In this position, just because we are being attacked with something extremely critical doesn't mean that we should ever stop looking for tactics. Let's face it, this queen is only just defended enough by the rook on g1, and rook to f1 totally works. After either rook takes rook, queen takes queen, or some move by white, then we take the queen, they take back, and we take a full rook on h1. White to move. Begin. And stop. In this position, I hope you looked at one of my previous videos about the secrets of reversing the move order technique. In this position, you would not have been wrong to start considering ideas like knight to g6 check, king to h7, and bishop to a2 check. But after knight to d5, as nice as this all looks, there just isn't a clear follow-up. But by kind of mixing up the move orders, so to speak, sort of. We're going to be using key elements of the same variation, but it's going to involve a new key element. Queen takes h7 check, forcing knight takes, so that after knight g6 check, king to g8, bishop a2 check. Now there is no knight to d5. We deflected it, and black is forced to play queen e6, and bishop takes queen, checkmate. Black to move. Begin. And time. In this position, black's pieces make quite the impression on white's king between the queen and the bishops. Not to mention, the only thing that's stopping bishop takes c3 checkmate is the unguarded queen on c5, who is also in line with the rook on g1. With all of these factors combined, we find queen to a7 spectacular move. Because if, well, white does nothing, we take a queen. If the queen goes somewhere to keep guarding the bishop, well, or if the queen goes somewhere to keep guarding the knight from the bishop, we go ahead and take that rook on g1. If they take our queen, we play bishop takes c3 checkmate. Please notice that while the move queen b6 appears to do similar things, it doesn't quite work in light of queen takes queen, bishop takes knight check, queen to b2, bishop takes king takes, when suddenly black probably isn't winning anymore. White to move. Begin. And time. You might have to forgive me for this position because it's extremely hard. The reason I know it's extremely hard, other than the fact that we're about to go through it and see how extremely hard it is that it was given to us by Mark Dvoretsky, renowned world-class Grandmaster trainer. In this position, white is up a pawn, but the problem is that a pawn to us is only valuable if we can actually use it to make a queen. And the problem is that our C pawn is our extra pawn, but if we push it, please remember the special rule of en passant. A pawn is moved 2 squares forward, side by side touching. This can capture, and so that's not going to work. And so the only way for us to push our C pawn is with support from our king. But if our king abandons to the queen side, then this king comes in like this. This is a complicated position, okay? Now, a lot of players here, I feel, would probably just end up accepting a draw because it is very, very hard to see. But you should try, nonetheless, in such a position, if you do feel that you're better or winning, which you should in this position, because A, you have an extra pawn, B, your king is more active. I mean, you have the reasons to look for it. So in that case, we should be looking at any possible idea to try and get a pawn across the board faster than our opponent. In this case, we have the phenomenal move, pawn to c4 anyways. B takes c3. Now we have to know something else. The rule of the square. Never forget. If we don't play king to e3 right now, we will not be able to catch the pawn. King to g5. Now this might all seem completely unworthwhile to look at unless you are actually thinking, okay, well now I have these 2 pawns versus this one. What is the fastest way that I can create passed pawns and still keep things manageable? Pawn to a4. Really spectacular move. King takes to g4. Pawn to b4. Pawn takes. And now listen, in the words of Lev Albert, who also helped craft this problem, who helped bring this problem to light, you have one last task to manage here, okay? This is really hard. This is where a lot of people would have a lot of struggles right now. And if you are a Grandmaster and you're actually watching this video, then I encourage you to have a second key position. You should have had this as a key position in your mind, and before you made a judgment call, you should try to take one more look forward here and decide, should you play a5 or should you play something else? Now, in this position, for a variety of factors. For one factor, when we play the move pawn to a5, the square of the pawn is right here. So that black king has at least 2 moves to try and get over there, so we don't have to rush it, okay? Also, other than these passed pawns, which our king can catch, this is going to be the hardest pawn to catch on h6, but we're only going to be in an even match in terms of racing once that pawn gets to h5, and even then, we will queen on a8, which will cover the h1 square, stopping them. And for all these reasons, you should be able to calmly come to the conclusion, without too much calculation, that the correct move here is king d3, just to make sure that these pawns go nowhere, in light of the fact that if king f4, they simply don't catch it, just like I was saying, and in light of the other variation, which is h5, then when we race all the way down to the other side, we queen, covering that queening square, okay? This is super hard. You made it to the end. Congratulations. All right, we're at the end of the test. If you scored something like 1 or 2 correct, actually that is totally normal and you should feel just fine about that. If you scored something more like 3 or 4, you're doing really well. If you scored more like 5 or 6, this is too easy for you and you either need to find more challenging problems, or, in my opinion, you need to give yourself less time. Try doing the same exercise, or try doing my next video with only giving yourself 30 seconds or maybe 15 seconds on the clock. Keep reducing that time so that you can increase the speed that you find those good moves, okay? And if you scored a perfect 8, then you are a Grandmaster. And Anish Giri, please reach out to me. Big fan. Would love to work with you. Anyways, I'm National Master Jesse Cohen. This is Summit School of Chess, and I just love you guys so much. Bye!